Good morning. Today is May 12th, Tuesday in the year 2020. We are going to continue our study of Abraham's life in our look at Genesis. Today we will be beginning with verse 16. Just by way of recap, in our last session, what we ended on was chapter 15, where God renewed his covenant with Abraham, or Abram at this point still. And as I said at the beginning of our discussion of Abram, uh, what we have essentially is a series of tests of Abram being given an opportunity to rise above his own personal doubts and fears and to trust in God, and him repeatedly failing. He doesn't necessarily always fail in everything. He shows a great deal of faith, remarkable character in many things. But in the major events, the issues related to God's covenant, the land, the offspring in particular, he messes up. And today we're going to see one of the big examples of that. Chapter 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai his wife took her Egyptian maidservant Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. I just want to point out a couple of things. This apparently is not an uncommon practice. Certainly not in polygamous societies. It's also not surprising that Hagar begins to despise Sarai. She is younger. She is able to bear children. So why is Sarai still the favored primary wife? Sarah said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my servant in your arms, and now she knows she is pregnant. She despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." This is also typical. Human beings create their own problems, and when the problem comes to a head, we want to find somebody to blame, even when it's our own fault. Yeah, Abram had his part in it, but the way it reads, it was Sarai's idea. This is not Abram's doing, it is hers equally. Your servant is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was a spring that is beside the road, a Shur. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai," she answered. The angel of the Lord said to her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now with child, and you will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery. He will be like a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He will live in hostility towards all his brothers." She gave this name to the Lord who had spoke to her. "You are the God who sees me." For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It is still there, between Kadesh and Beer. Ishmael means God hears, and Beer Lahai Roi means well of the living one who sees me. Hagar, who is often villainized without cause, I think, is fleeing from distress, fleeing from persecution that she doesn't deserve. Yeah, she had bad feelings for Sarai, but what of it? They're not justified. And yet, because of that, she was beaten, probably mistreated. She runs away. And we are told, the angel of the Lord. I have not looked up in Hebrew what that one is, but this voice of God comes and sees her in her distress and hears her in her distress and makes her a promise. You will have a son, and you will have descendants that are too many to count. This is a big deal. The things promised to Abraham, that he would have offspring and that he would have a name, all of these things show up here. And Hagar, the maidservant, the handmaiden, she has a son who is given a name by God. And she is promised infinite offspring. It's very important in the ancient world. And I think for us, the story is also important. How many times have we perhaps felt alone, running from some distress, hiding? But in that place, God still sees us and hears us and wants to restore us back to a place of wholeness. But I think we have to pay attention. In my sermon Sunday, I had to put people who would cover their ears and go, la, 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 not listening. We can do that easily. Even when we would think that the words we want to hear most often or most strongly is, hello, I'm here to rescue you. But sometimes we don't want to be rescued from our distress. We want to wallow in it. Or we do want out, but we want it done our way. Hagar listened to God. In the midst of your running, are you willing to do as much as Hagar and listen to the God who sees and the God who hears? So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will confirm my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. Um, God says, I am El Shaddai, mighty God. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram, you will be called Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you are now an alien, I will give you as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. Then God said to Abram, As for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you must be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born in your household or bought with money from a foreigner. Those who are not your offspring, whether born in your house or bought with your money, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is to be everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people, for he has broken my covenant. God also said to Abram, As for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarai bear a child at the age of 90? And Abram said to God, If only Ishmael might live under your blessing. God said, Yes, but your wife Sarai will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers. I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. When he had finished speaking with Abram, God went up from him. The very day Abram took his son Ishmael and all who was born in his household or bought with his money, every male in his household, and circumcised them, as God told him. Abram was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. Abraham and his son Ishmael were both circumcised on the same day. And every male in Abraham's household, including those born in his household or bought from a foreigner, was circumcised with him. um, Notice here this third giving of a covenant and how it has been modified. In the first covenant, Abraham is simply told to go, and I will bless you. I will make you many people. I will make your name great. In the second giving of the covenant, we saw in chapter 15, it's a little more complicated, a little more ritualized, but it was still essentially, I will bless you and take care of you. But in this one, the most famous one perhaps, where his name is changed, it's a little bit different. In the covenant in 15, the land is described as from the river of Egypt, the Nile, to the Euphrates. Okay, basically all of the Fertile Crescent. In this version, the promised land is Canaan alone. It's a big difference. And before, the covenants were simply, this is what I'm going to do for you. This one has a requirement, the requirement of circumcision. Now, why circumcision? I mean, if you're going to prove that you are God's, why not a haircut? Why not a mark on the forehead? Why not something that is always visible? Well, the covenant reminder wasn't for everybody else. It was for Abram and for his descendants. And it ties very closely to this idea of offspring. Here is a reminder to every man every day, every woman that engages with one of these men, that the offspring that they have are a gift from God. There is few things that would be more significant to a man that he would remember all the time than circumcision. Now, just in case we forget, circumcision was practiced by lots of different people in lots of different times for various reasons. Circumcision is not the domain of the Jews alone. It was not even the domain of the descendants of Abraham alone at the time they lived. So it's not as if what God asked Abram to do was completely unheard of. But I imagine it was not a pleasant experience. Also notice, and this is in contrast to the story that we will read tomorrow, that Sarah, it will bear Isaac. Isaac means he laughs. Here, the son is named Isaac because Abram, or Abraham finally, laughed. In the next story, Sarah will laugh to herself. Again, I want to point out that I don't think the ancient writers were bothered by inconsistencies like these. I don't think that they really intended to set out a biography of Abram or Abraham. That's not their point. Instead, they're telling isolated incidents, stories that mean more than just what they say, stories about the way the world works and why it works that way. Why, for example, the tribes of Canaan are always at war with them. Well, it is because they are descendants of Ishmael, and we are descendants of Isaac, of course. Even in these stories that seem fairly concrete, we are still dealing with stories that are intended to explain theology and the way the world works, and not so much intended to be exactly what happened. This is probably the biggest challenge for the modern mind, that anyone would write down a story of something that happened in the past and not tell it exactly as it happened. Details were far less important in the ancient world. The truth, and notice truth is different than fact. Fact are things that can be verified. Truth is what is real. It is something bigger than facts. The example I always give is love. A series of actions might be factual, but love is an intangible quality. It cannot be proven, it cannot be disproven. It can only be shown or withheld. And so as we look at these stories, we look for truth, not facts. And I think that's an important distinction. And that they might be more the one than the other does not discount their value to us as Christians. On the contrary, a merely factual account of events of people living in the Bronze Age might be interesting, but would not carry the meaning that has held these stories for at least 3,000 years, if not more. The thing about that, as you read, we will continue the story now of Abraham and Sarah next time. Until then, may God keep you.